Jade, well, here outside of Mar-a-Lago, there were just a handful of demonstrators today showing their support for former President Donald Trump. But regarding those protests that former President Trump called for, the Palm Beach Police Department, West Palm Beach Police Department, and Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office all say that they are ready to respond if needed. Now, regarding Palm Beach County State Attorney Dave Aronberg, he says that he does not think that Trump would be indicted as early as tomorrow, though Aronberg does expect it to happen some point in the coming days.
I think it's unlikely that it'll be as soon as Tuesday. I do think it's coming, but I think it's most likely to be at the end of the week.
While Aronberg does not have any inside knowledge of that Manhattan District Attorney case regarding a $130,000 hush money payment to adult film star Stormy Daniels, he says too much would have to happen in the grand jury for an indictment to be handed down as soon as tomorrow. However, Aronberg thinks an indictment is coming.
I've always thought that an indictment of the former president was likely because you have 4 investigations of his alleged criminal conduct. But I think the New York case is actually the least of the 4, but it's the one that apparently is going to go first. And New York prosecutors have given every indication that it's coming later this week.
He says at that point, Trump can either surrender to New York authorities or resist extradition. If that happens, Governor Ron DeSantis would have 90 days to sign an extradition order against Trump.
The question is whether Trump would agree to surrender to New York authorities. That would be the easiest way to do it. Now, if he decides to resist extradition, then it would go to the governor, and that would present a quite interesting situation where his political rival would have to sign paperwork to extradite Donald Trump to New York. And so I don't know what exactly is going to happen.
Aronberg says if Trump surrenders, he likely will not spend any time in jail and will not have to wear handcuffs, though he would be booked, fingerprinted, and he would have to get his mugshot taken. And coming up at 6, we'll hear what a constitutional expert says an indictment or conviction would mean for Trump's 2024 presidential bid. Reporting live near Palm Beach, Steve King, WPBF 25 News.